The film that we're seeing produced out of this facility is the best animation that I've ever been involved with, and all this work will create for us my dream, which is to have for the rest of all of our careers a thriving animation studio somewhere in the world.
Steven Spielberg always wanted to be Walt Disney. He even acknowledged his opportunity to do it. After E.T., I saw an opening to build the new Disney, especially after people offered me studios. But he turned it down and became a father, he says, referring to the son he had in 1985 with his first wife, Amy Irving. After Max was born, the ambition wasn't there as much. It became, in some ways, a real choice. I realized that I could be a Disney, but that I would be a terrible father. Or I could forget Disney and be a great father. No matter how much they try, the new Disney will never be the old Disney, Mr. Spielberg says. Walt was one person. He wasn't a corporation. That's why he was a genius. He knew how to use people and how to get the best out of them. It all came from him. Spielberg made these comments in 1992 to the New York Times. This was perhaps after he realized how difficult it was to become the next Walt Disney, especially in animation. Only 2 years before, he had launched his own animation company, Amblimation. The studio's first feature would be a financial flop, crushed by New Disney's Beauty and the Beast, which so much resembled and improved upon the old Disney that the period was labeled the Disney Renaissance. Meanwhile, Amblimation would only produce 3 films before the company shuttered. This is the story of Steven Spielberg and Amblimation. There was good reason for Spielberg to hop into the animation game in the late 80s. Disney was almost on the verge of shuttering their own historic toon empire. The Dark Ages were upon Disney Studios after The Black Cauldron was a massive disappointment. The studio was faltering under the leadership of Ron Miller and the fact that no one could be Walt Disney. When the new leadership of Eisner and Katzenberg came in, they even wondered if they should just kill off animation, even though Roy Disney, Walt's nephew, kept insisting it was the heart of the company. It is here that we meet director Phil Nibelink.
So most of my Sweatbox experience was with Ted Berman. I worked in his unit for quite some time, and in fact went on then to work under his unit on Black Cauldron. So I had a very good relationship with Ted, and Ted would be looking at my footage and make his comments, and I'd go do my corrections. Black Cauldron took a long time to make. I was on it for 4 years. I think about 2 years into that, there was the takeover, and Eisner and Katzenberg came in. And I had just completed a very complicated scene of one of the huntsmen turning into a deathless warrior. And, the deathless warriors were the skeletons that came to life because of the Black Cauldron. And then when Gurgi threw himself into the cauldron, he reversed the spell, and all the deathless warriors started to die and fall apart and dissolve, basically. And I had this really long and complicated scene of a deathless warrior landing on the ground and shaking, and all his flesh bubbling and boiling and dripping off. And it was a lot of work and a lot of drawings and very complicated. And they got it all the way to color, and that's when Katzenberg came in and took a look at the movie, and the first thing he says is, well, we got to cut that scene out because my 3-year-old will be frightened by it. so that was a crying shame because there was so much work that went into it. But it was pretty abrupt. They didn't think much of animation. It hadn't been making money, and these guys, Eisner and Katzenberg, were live action guys, and so one of the very first things they decided is, well, we need more office space for all our live action producers. And here's this lovely building being filled to the brim with animators and artists. So they got us a warehouse over in Glendale, and they sent us all packing into that warehouse. And, they filled up all the animation offices with live action producers. So yes, it was quite a big change.
Other animated releases were embarrassing Disney at the box office. The Care Bears movie, for instance, made $13 million more than The Black Cauldron. But perhaps more significantly, American Tail, directed by Disney cast-off Don Bluth, became the highest-grossing animated film of all time. And of course, American Tail was produced by none other than Steven Spielberg, who saw potential in Bluth's box office failure, Secret of NIMH. This is where Spielberg saw his opening. But then, surprisingly, he partnered with Disney to make Roger Rabbit, another animated hit. One of our other main characters is director Simon Wells. Wells is the great-grandson of sci-fi writer H.G. Wells, and the son of two scientists, but he found himself drawn towards animation. And he was discovered by the legendary animator Dick Williams, who was about to embark on his most famous project, which Simon will tell you all about.
I was working, actually, I can remember one evening I was working with Dick on a commercial, actually I think for a newspaper that no longer exists. And the phone goes, and I go and answer the phone, and it's Chuck Jones, which is pretty amazing to get Chuck Jones on the phone. And so I go into Dick and say, it's Chuck Jones. Chuck and Dick have known each other for years and years. And so Dick goes off and chats, and then about 15 minutes later he comes back in and he says, that was Chuck, and he just ordered me to do this film. He said, I've never told you to do anything in your life, Dick, but you've got to do this film. Because Spielberg and Zemeckis had gone to Chuck and said, who should direct the animation? And Chuck had said, there's only one guy in the world who can do the animation that you're looking for in this film, and that's this guy, Dick Williams. That was for Roger Rabbit. So they then showed up and recruited Dick to direct the animation. And Dick, in turn, used, the core of his commercial animation studio as the basis to build out the animation studio in London to do the movie. I just kind of rolled into it. It was a series of extraordinarily fortuitous events.
Director, Phil Nibelink.
Roger Rabbit got greenlit, and Richard Williams was moving to the studio looking for people who would love to join him in London. I jumped at the chance. I thought that'd be great. Excellent. Best experience of my life. I miss it dearly. It was way too much fun. In fact, it was so much fun that I just didn't have the heart to go back to California, and I just I had met my future wife there in London, and I couldn't leave, and so I stayed.
During Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I was not only an animator, but also because I had worked for several years with Dick on commercials, I had become his kind of his go-to response when there was something he didn't want to do. So, for instance, when there were client meetings he didn't want to do, he'd say, "Oh, this is Simon. He's really good," and then he'd run out the door. Or he'd simply fail to show up, and I'd have to take the meeting. And so there would be stuff that needed to be figured out and storyboarded, and Bob would want Dick to be part of kind of figuring stuff out. So, for instance, the Maroon cartoon at the very beginning, Dick dragged me into that because he knew I could scribble ideas out fast, and so that became kind of a pattern. So at regular intervals during the production, I got hauled out and went off and storyboarded various bits and pieces. I did a couple of passes of the Toontown sequence, for instance. It was a fairly hard drinking movie. It started off with just everyone going down the pub on Friday nights, and then became Wednesday nights and Friday nights, and then became pretty much every night. And some of the animators had bottles of whiskey in their desks and stuff like that. I was not a particularly popular guy on the Roger Rabbit crew. I was an arrogant shit, to be honest. I think I was like 25, 26 when the movie started, and I was very productive. I had the highest footage of any animator. You know, animation, they always count by footage, which is 2/3 of a second is a foot of film. And so on average, animators did about 4 or 5 foot a week. Andreas Deja, I think, did like 8 or 9. Phil Niblink had an average around 11. I had an average of like 15 or 16. So I was an arrogant bastard about it, and not popular as a result, which proved to be difficult when we came to set up Amblimation. I realized I had to rather change style, because there were 1 or 2 animators who didn't want to come and work there simply because I was going to be there. And that was a bit of a wake-up call.
In the meantime, Disney was getting back on track with Oliver and Company, which took back the animated crown and outgrossed Spielberg's and Bluth's next outing, The Land Before Time, in 1988. Bluth and Spielberg battled over the darkness of that film, leading Spielberg to cut 19 scenes that he believed were too scary for kids. After that film, Bluth and Spielberg never worked together again.
When Disney decided they were going to close down the Roger Rabbit studio, because at one point they were thinking they were going to sort of keep it there as a hub in England, and then they reconsidered and decided to close it. And so Stephen was looking to find another studio to make a sequel for Fievel, and realized that, wait a minute, there's this huge pool of talent in Europe. If we started up a studio in London, we could actually get a whole lot of those ex-Roger Rabbit people to come and be part of the studio. Phil had sort of got wind of this, and he petitioned to be part of it.
When Don Bluth declined, I jumped at the chance and I threw myself on my knees before Frank Marshall, who was the producer for Stephen, and I said, I'd love to direct on that thing. And all during that production, I was still talking to Frank Marshall, saying, please, 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 I want to do it. And the time was right, and spent the next 9.5 years there boarding and directing for Stephen on what became Amblimation.
And then they were looking around for someone to co-direct with Phil, and I guess my name had come up, and Robert Watts sort of approached me and said, does that sound like something you'd be interested in? And I said, well, yeah, it could be. The Hollywood legend version of this, which is actually more or less true, I was walking through Amblin, this compound that Stephen has on the Universal lot, and I was walking through it on my way to go and have a meeting with Bob Zemeckis. You walk through and you see like Stephen drive in his truck or car or whatever he's driving at the moment, and you got to play it cool, because you don't want to be gawking, because you're a professional, right? So you walk on through, and then I hear this voice saying, "Hey Simon, is that Simon behind those glasses?" And I look around, and Spielberg is literally climbing over a hedge to come and talk to me, and proceeds to ask me if I'd like to direct a movie for him. And this is kind of one of those things that you don't say no to. Steven Spielberg walks up to you and offers you a film to direct. So, yeah, I guess I'm probably going to do that then, huh? It was only a low hedge. I mean, it was knee height, but, yeah. It sounds good in the story,
Amblimation was set up in London because Disney owned all the top animators in the United States. According to the New York Times, after producing Roger Rabbit for Disney, Mr. Spielberg decided that if he was going to make animated features on a significant scale, he would have to grab the top artists and set up his own company. Forming Amblimation, he says, was like the Americans and the Russians competing to get the rocket scientists out of Berlin after World War II. What we have already discovered, and what other studios will discover, is that there's not exactly an army of animators waiting for employment, but a complete shortage. Within their own little world, they are beginning to attain the status of Kevin Costner and Julia Roberts, and studios are starting to steal them from studios.
What happened was that Jeffrey Katzenberg was kind of getting edged out of live action. He had made a lot of enemies, and so he attached himself to animation and put the pedal to the metal, and it became the golden age of animation, because he made one hit after another. And Stephen got on the bandwagon too at the same time, so there was a big competition for animators.
Back when Fievel started, which was, I guess, 89, is when we started the thing. And I don't know whether we set up the studio in '89 or '90. But yes, having pulled out of Europe, Disney then set up a studio to do, was it Tailspin, I think it was. And so there was a bit of a scuffle over, getting animators to work on one project or another, and some jumped ship and so on.
And back in those days, the salaries for animators just went through the animators and everybody in animation, art directors, assistants, designers, you name it, went through the roof. And people, these artists had to get agents in order to negotiate their salaries, and a lot of people got really rich. I remember friends telling me that during that era, you could just see the cars in the parking lot. They all turned into Porsches and Mercedes.
And as if Amblimation wasn't a direct challenge to Disney already, their logo would also be a mouse, Fievel from American Tail. With animation shaping up as Hollywood's new profit center, Universal Studios quickly offered to finance Mr. Spielberg's movies. Tom Pollock, the chairman of Universal, recalls from the outset that Spielberg wanted money not just for movies, but to build an institution. He wanted to set up a facility that would have the best directors, the best conceptual designers, the best talent in the world.
Its very reason for existing was Fievel Goes West. They already knew they had that project and wanted to do it. And so it was a matter of creating a studio to do it rather than creating a studio and then coming up with an original property.
Now then, Steven Spielberg, who among his other admirable qualities is a renowned Anglophile, has recently opened an animation studio in West London, and it was there that he made An American Tail, Fievel Goes West, the sequel to An American Tail. What's more, Spielberg is obviously a far stauncher European community man than many of our MPs, because he shipped in a whole load of animators from all over the continent to augment the team of Britons and Americans that he'd already assembled. Film 91 was, of course, there while the film was being made.
We sort of scoured people who were... there was a big industry in London doing commercials, because Dick Williams had spawned a series of other commercial outfits. There was a sort of regular thing that people like Oscar Grillo or Dick Purdom, or, they'd worked for Dick for a few years, and then they'd realized that, life could be more fun if they were working for themselves. And they go off and set up their own outfits. So there were a whole series of these little satellite studios that usually only had a kind of permanent staff of half a dozen or a dozen people, and then would inflate or deflate depending on their sort of commercial load. So there was quite a big population of animators and quite a large population of kind of itinerant animators in London. So, for instance, there were a bunch of Canadian animators who regularly kind of strolled around London. Then also the school Gobelin in Paris, which is a superb animation school, was churning out these young French animators who could draw like crazy and really understood animation. And so we had, for a couple of years, we had kind of a direct line. We were lucky, early on we recruited Christophe Sorand, who was regarded as a sort of young god of animation in France, and had taught at Gobelin. And so he had a whole series of, young kids who trained under him, who just followed him to London. People like William Salazar and Patrick, I've forgotten his surname, and Rodolphe Guénedin, and all these guys, they were all straight out of Gobelin and straight into our studio. We had a kind of ridiculously young average age. I think one of the oldest people in the studio was Steve Hickner at the age of 35. Most of our crew was under 30. We actually started off doing the storyboarding of the thing up at Elstree. Actually, what had been the old clothing department, the costume department at Elstree. So we were there for sort of 6 months while we organised, while Cindy Woodburn found the property in Acton, which was, it has to be said, not a particularly salubrious part of London. But that was the place where we could find enough floor space for a reasonable price. Anyway, we set up there and built an entire forest of IKEA furniture. We got a carpenter to come and quote us about building animation desks. And he actually looked at what we needed, and he said, "Look, you can get this from IKEA, and I can cut you the discs into the IKEA furniture, but I can't afford to buy the wood for the price of the IKEA furniture." So we bought, about 500 of these kind of rack-mounted desk setups, and there was this maze of wooden kind of passageways, which were just all these animation desks fitted together. The concept was actually, it was Phil's concept to set the place up. He said his frustration had always been getting access to the directors. And so he said, what we should do is we should put the directors right in the middle of the studio and make it sort of open plan so that we're right there. And then around us is the video testing, so that when animators come and shoot their videos, they can literally just get us to look at them straight away. We don't have to book an appointment and all that kind of nonsense. Let's get rid of all of that. And then also let's have editorial right next to us, so because we spend a lot of time, cutting storyboards together and cutting stuff into the reel. And then let's have each of the departments kind of like a cheese wedge feeding out from that. In theory, your head of department is near to the central hub, and then as you move out, you've got more and more members of the department. I mean, it didn't work out quite like that, just because geographically it's difficult to sort that out. That was broadly the policy, and then we had eventually camera and ink and paint and stuff like that on another floor. But yeah, the whole thing was kind of an open plan, total access all the time kind of thing, which. Thank God Phil and I were young and energetic, because it was kind of murderous. You'd be working away on storyboards, because we pretty much storyboarded those films ourselves. We didn't have a big story crew. And people would come along and interrupt you all the time. But on the other hand, it made an inherent efficiency that was good. And it also was good in terms of the animation crew feeling like they were really involved in making the movie, and they weren't just kind of cogs, because, they could see the directors were working away all the time. Oh, yeah, we turned the lights on and we turned the lights off.
The idea was that animation is so labor-intensive and takes so long that many animated films typically have multiple directors, and they become, in effect, sequence directors and take on different chunks of the film. So Stephen put Simon and I. Simon was also a directing animator during Roger Rabbit. So Stephen got to know both of us at the same time. In fact, Simon and I sat very close to each other in the Camden studios. So it was Stephen's feeling that he should put us together, and it was a great partnership. And Simon and I worked well together for years. And in fact, I just spoke with him the other day. So Simon and I had different skills. Simon was very good at action and drama and dynamic cinematic camera moves. And I think my strengths were more towards silly slapstick comedy. And so we knew that about each other. And so we carefully divided up Fievel Goes West in a way where I was taking on the comedy and he was taking on the more of the drama.
We kind of divided the movie up, which, again, I think in retrospect probably was not a smart way of doing things, but we broke the movie into sections, and to a large extent, the front end of the movie was me and the back end of the movie was Phil, as I recall.
Well, it was daunting because, Don Bluth, very, very talented guy, and had done a really nice movie in American Tail. And so we wanted to try to at least come up to at least that bar and hopefully, with any luck, surpass it. We did have the advantage that we were building a studio from scratch, and we were getting people we'd never worked with, whereas Don Bluth had worked with the same people for decades. He was already well up to speed by the time he did his movies with Stephen. One disadvantage we had was we had a lot of a green crew. And they were very, very fine people, but there was also a lot of kids straight out of art school that we were trying to train. And so you have to be very careful with the casting to make sure that, the close-ups are done by your best guys. The long shots and crowd scenes were done by guys who were still green. but at the same time train them to come up to and be able to step up into scenes that had demanded better acting and better animation. But as far as working with Don Bluth, stepping in the footsteps of Don, Don Bluth created a long shadow that we kind of knew that no matter what we did, Don Bluth would hate it.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say there were some stylistic things that we didn't particularly like about the way Don Bluth made movies. And some of it was sort of just kind of drawing style, and some of it was kind of, design of shots and things like that. Phil and I were young and sort of stupid and ambitious, and we wanted to do amazing bits of cinematography, and
even made it pretty clear in our very first meeting that he kind of wanted that style. He said, I remember, I want moving light, I want light sources in the frame. He said, I want, dynamic angles wherever possible. And he said that he was good at what was called concept shots, which meant a lot of the story would be told within a frame rather than cutting. He wasn't in favor of cutting a lot at the beginning of sequences. In other words, Steven Spielberg is known for his fast cutting, like in Duel, for example. But if you look at Duel, he wasn't just cutting quickly all the time. What he would do is he would let the film breathe and start out slow with long cuts, and action and storytelling would happen within a fixed frame. And that gave you somewhere to go then, contrast-wise. And as a given sequence picks up speed, the cutting gets shorter and sharper. And then you come to a climax within a sequence, and then you go back to slow cutting. And so we would try to emulate that as much as possible, and also try to do the Spielberg trick of backlighting every shot and putting the source lights in the shot.
Spielberg encouraged, crazy difficult camera shots. And one of the things he'd do when he looked at our story reels is he'd say, oh, I got a shot here, and he'd give you the description of the shot, which was, very often he genius shot. But then you'd think, well, how the hell are we going to do that in, traditional techniques? That was actually, it was great fun coming up with that stuff. Expensive and so on. I mean, thank God we were all young and cheap, figuring out kind of relatively low-tech ways of achieving shots. Because, one of the things that one forgets is that, this is before the days of, computer animation really being part of the sort of feature animation world. I mean, things like Great Mouse Detective had used some computer animation in the cogwheels of Big Ben. And there had been things like Tron, but in general, it hadn't been integrated into regular feature animation. So, for instance, in Fievel Goes West, there's a whole sequence in the sewers, traveling through the sewers, which was a technical feat that Robert Crawford and Harold Kraut, amazing crazy layout artist guy, they figured out how to do sort of takeovers of one piece of artwork to the next, to actually travel through the sewers and round corners and up and down. So I'd storyboarded a thing which was going to be quite impossible to do any other way than just drawing your way through it. And Harold figured out a way of doing this with a series of background pieces, and then worked out with Robert Crawford how to multi-pack those pieces together in a film camera, so that you do a series of passes with matte levels and dropping pieces in and so on. It's incredibly complicated. It actually came together in the end, which I was astonished by, but took several months. And Robert Crawford and a team of guys, they built, multiplanes for various shots that we came up with. They didn't have a multiplane camera. They built, out of essentially string and sealing wax, extra levels onto the camera and moving peg bars. And so they did some really, truly extraordinary things with really very basic camera equipment. And all the lens flare stuff and so on, that was created in camera.
What's that over there?
Well, that is more America.
Can we go see it?
Someday you will come true.
Now someday is today. as Steven Spielberg presents An American Tale. Fievel Goes West. The further adventures of the Mouskowitz family.
I have to say, looking back on it, we knew almost nothing about story. And it is, to a certain extent, embarrassing to me to look at it and go, oh man, yes, we should have actually spent more time really figuring the story out better. We were all about kind of, hey, what kind of amazing shot can we do here? What if we traveled through here and down here and over this? And I mean, a lot of that was to do with the fact that neither of us knew story terribly well, and there wasn't a great deal of story development in the film, to be strictly honest. So it feels a little different stylistically, and also just how much work went into developing character and plot lines and stuff. We were kind of running hell for leather trying to get the thing done, and normally in kind of the Disney process, you spend a year or two working and reworking the story and doing screenings of storyboards before you ever actually start production. And we essentially had a kind of 6-month start on storyboards ahead of production starting, but we were feeding the beast. We didn't really have a lot of time to do many revisions, and we didn't have time to sort of assemble the whole film and look at it and disassemble it and rebuild it, which you would typically do in the way that features are made, particularly at Disney and DreamWorks, but increasingly at other studios as well. I think Spielberg sort of thought, well, if we've got a script, let's just do the script. And that, it turns out, is not the best way of making animated features, which is why when Jeffrey set up DreamWorks Animation, he said, no, we're doing it the Disney way. It's not efficient, but it produces the best movies.
Writer Charles Swenson.
I was in New Mexico, and I got a call from Lisa Henson. I don't know how they got my name, but they were doing Fievel Goes West, and they wondered if I had any ideas. So I was working on a screenplay with a guy who lived there in New Mexico, and I had lots of downtime, so I whipped up a couple of pages and sent them off, and like a week later they said, well, you're on. Whoa! So I went back and forth for a while, and then moved back to LA, and it was a great experience. They got Clint Dillian to do the final draft, and he's the credited screenwriter. I'm the story by, which is fine with me. But I wish, in retrospect, that I had understood a little bit more of the story arc that they were looking for, because I think I could have done it easily. But there you go. That's showbiz. Being a writer, you don't have a lot of interaction with the rest of the world. So I don't have a lot of stories about it, because I wasn't involved in the production. I don't have a lot of stories about what went on in the company. I'd go into Amblin, every couple of weeks or something like that, and say what I'd done, what the latest update was, leave the pages, and then go on.
Writer Flint Dille.
The first movie I wrote for them was a thing called Tiny Toons, and they ended up making it as a TV show. But I worked on that for, I don't know, a pretty long time. I'd say, 6-8 months. And I'm making that up. Might have been longer. And one day Stephen came in and said, well, I kind of good news and bad news for you. The bad news is we're going to make Tiny Toons a TV show, not a movie. We got to compete with DuckTales. And the good news is I have another movie for you. And that turned out to be Fievel Goes West. And I didn't meet Chuck Swenson until, long after that. I think actually at the premiere Fievel. He had a draft and it was good. They just wanted, and that's the way Amblin worked. I mean, the truth is, I was like 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th writer on the project, from as best I can figure. At one point, they had a guy who specialized in Yiddish write it, because I'm pretty waspy. I happen to like Yiddish a lot, but I'm certainly not fluent in it. So they had a Yiddish writer do a pass on it. We got it back, and Steven said, so what do you think? It just feel like a foreign film. And I said, oh, wait. We sort of made it so that it had Yiddish stuff in it, but it didn't seem alien to viewers, was the idea. And that's the way scripts worked then. They were very collaborative efforts. And, you know, and then when it was over, Stephen called and said, okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm giving Chuck story credit and you're getting script credit because this is your script. And because it's not Writers Guild, it's animation, Stephen's credits were the credits that we went with. I recall getting the script and meeting with Stephen really early on. At that point, I knew him because I met him on Tiny Toons, and he, you know, we were comfortable together. And I mean, he's great. Stephen's great. He just sort of told me what he wanted, and it was the first draft to me, which really became kind of the defining draft. There would be many more, okay, but the defining draft of the movie, it seems to me, it just happened very quickly. I want to say it happened inside a week. You know, I just went through it, and at that point, I spent a lot of time doing animation where, you know, it was TV, where we had to get things done really fast, and, you know, it was just really fluid. And it happened very quickly, and it was a lot of changes. It was 1,000 little changes and not a lot of big ones in the first draft. I think there were a few, like 3 or 4 new scenes and a few things taken out and other things just kind of tinkered around with. It ended up being, you know, pretty much the story Chuck had. Yeah, you know, and, you know, the script itself was a lot different. Yeah, I grew up watching Westerns, so it's not like this was an alien genre to me at all. I mean, this was, you know, just hard-coded into my consciousness. And when I was a kid, like, everything on TV was a Western. I think I saw every Western that came out in my childhood, and at one point or another, maybe not when I was a kid, and you know, was well-versed in everything from, you know, Fort Apache and, you know, the whole Cavalry trilogy was, you know, something well known to me before I started. And that's sort of it was sort of the sensibility we had for the film. And we knew pretty quickly we wanted this to be much funnier and toonier, and this wasn't a maudlin, you know, American Tale 1, you know, sad story. And that's why we had, you know, what's her name, getting hit with tomatoes, you know, when she started singing Somewhere Out There. We wanted to say very early on, we're not doing Somewhere Out There movie.
One of the things that I believe, and again, this is, I don't have this verbatim, but one of the things I believe had soured the relationship with Bluth is that Bluth would essentially, you know, present storyboards, and then if there were any changes, that would cost more money. And Spielberg had kind of really disliked that. Any attempt to talk to Stephen about budgets, really, you know, he would find ways to avoid talking about budgets, which is why essentially we went over budget. I don't know the ins and outs of where the money came to deal with the over budget thing. And I guess at some point, you know, Spielberg went back to, I don't know, Sid Sheinberg or someone and said, sorry, we need more cash. We were not particularly intimately involved in the financial struggles beyond trying to keep it to a certain price. I mean, I was more involved when we did Balto. I think, and I can't swear to this, but I think the budget was originally intended to be $14 million, and we actually went painfully over budget and ended up costing 21. But you know, at the same time, Disney was spending, you know, 40 on Little Mermaid. So yeah, we were on a shoestring. And plus, our budget was actually, you know, that's the cost of setting up the studio as well. So, you know, that's including the overhead, where one always looks at the numbers that studios offer for the budgets of their films and say, yes, but how much infrastructure was paid for out of this? And the answer is probably nothing.
Fievel Goes West would also have the unique distinction of being one of its stars, Jimmy Stewart's, final film.
There was a character named Wiley Burp. He was the old gunfighter. And originally Robin Williams was going to play him. And very close to the end, Robin Williams signed a deal to do what, you know, I think was Aladdin, where he was the genie. And Stephen said, well, Robin Williams isn't going to do it. He can't do it for contractual reasons. But we got Jimmy Stewart instead. And you know, all in a flash, I'm thinking, oh man, the real Jimmy Stewart. That's incredible.
Yeah, I think that was my idea. Yeah, that was my suggestion. And Stephen liked it and said, I'll make the phone call myself, which is great. Well, I mean, I do my own Jimmy Stewart voice. So I was using, when you do an animatic, you end up putting your own voices in a scratch track. And I could do a Jimmy Stewart. I could do Jimmy Stewart, say. And so we would put that voice in, and that became sort of it became the zeitgeist that everybody wanted that voice. And so Stephen was very kind and called him personally and talked him into coming.
And so obviously writing a script for Jimmy Stewart and Robin Williams is a different thing. So I watched all the old, like Winchester 78 and a few other, just binged Jimmy Stewart Westerns. That was the time I was really studying Westerns, but it was for the specific purpose of writing for Jimmy Stewart.
Oh, yeah, I directed Jimmy Stewart. I'm actually, strangely, I am the last director to work with Jimmy Stewart on a film, which is a peculiar, peculiar sort of honor. Yeah, we did one recording session, and it was nerve-wracking because not only am I directing Jimmy Stewart, the Jimmy Stewart. One of the first things I've ever done in the film business has actually impressed my parents. They're scientists. They weren't terribly interested in the whole film business, but Jimmy Stewart they'd heard of. So not only am I directing Jimmy Stewart, but I also have Steven Spielberg sitting in a chair behind me, offering suggestions from time to time. It was nerve-wracking. There I was, all of 28, 29 years old. But yeah, Jimmy Stewart, he was fantastic. He was incredibly generous and nice, sweetest guy, and surprisingly energetic considering he was late 70s when we were doing it or something.
It would be hard to find people further on the different actor spectrum than Jimmy Stewart and Robin Williams. Well, there's one artifact of it still in the script. And that was this line about, it's a very long, complicated piece of dialogue about it's a dog-eat-dog world.
Let this sleeping dog lie, son. Doggone it, I'm dog-tired. I'm tired of leading a dog's life and fighting like cats and dogs against cats and dogs and young pups dogging my trail trying to become top dog. I'm going to the dogs in a dog-eat-dog world, son. I'm so far over the hill, I'm on the bottom of the other side.
And that one was supposed to stay intact. And I think that was some weird, morph of Stephen, Chuck, and I. And we liked that line so much, and we were thinking, how's Jimmy Stewart going to even get through this? I mean, this was like Robin Williams on speed if you're doing that line. And you'll see it. It's a very complex line. I just can't remember it verbatim now. And when we actually got to the recording session, it was great. I mean, the real Jimmy Stewart standing there, and Stephen, points in and says, "Can you believe that's Jimmy Stewart?" And I said, "No, I don't believe I'm here with you, much less him." Jimmy Stewart does it in one take, and he does it perfectly. And afterwards, I think that's the longest piece of dialogue anybody's ever given me. I wonder why, Jimmy. I mean, he got it done, one take, perfect, and you realize just why he was Jimmy Stewart. That was one of just the amazing moments of Fievel Goes West.
And that was a great day to record Jimmy Stewart. He was really amazing. He was funny because the way you read a script is you do one line at a time. You perfect it. You do multiple takes. And Jimmy came in and he took a deep. We said rolling, and he took a deep breath and he waited and he waited. He was getting into character. And Stephen was in the recording session at the time. He turned to me and said, "Somebody say action," and I said, "I already did." So it was like we're waiting for him to get into character. And then he started reading, and he did the whole script. We couldn't stop him. He just went page after page. He's turning the pages, reading the whole thing, and nobody wanted to stop, and we didn't want to say anything, so we just let him go. And he went. He went through the whole script, and then we said, "Well, that's great. Can we go back and catch a few of those other lines? We'll just go in and do one line at a time." I had to explain to him afterwards that we wanted just to take it off one line at a time.
But he did do the lazy eye noises, which is incredible.
No, all wrong.
What did I do wrong? You want me to hold it in my mouth and dribble all over it?
You want to act like a dog, you got to think like a dog, till you smell like a dog. No self-respecting dog fetches anything unless he's good and feels like it. You want to intimidate someone, give them the lazy eye.
Oh, gee, I'm afraid to ask. Okay, what's the lazy eye?
The lazy eye. Now you do it.
Fievel Goes West ends with one of its best scenes, and Jimmy Stewart's final. It's Fievel Mouskowitz and Wiley Burp sitting on a western tundra, staring at the sunset.
Yeah, the bit about the part about you might find you're the hero you've been looking for. That part there at the very end, one man's sun sets, another man's dawn. Yes, yeah, I remember the circumstances of that. We got near the end of the film, and it was really funny. It's how different the real world is than film school. And I remember what happened was we were trying to figure out how to end it. I mean, we knew the end of the movie. We knew they were going to pull old gunfighter back, and he was gonna win the day and all that. We knew that, but it was like, what's the final scene with Wiley Burp and Fievel? And we hadn't really even thought about it. And I don't even think there was a rough version of the scene in there. And Stephen and I were in the hallway, ran into each other in the hallway in Amblin, is what I recall. And he said, we got to have a theme for this. And I was thinking, like in film school, they would teach you must know your theme before you start writing. And it occurred to me, we got all the way through this. We're near the end, and, on the 3-yard line. And it's like, oh, yeah, we got to have a theme. And so we talked about that for a while. And, I said, let me think about it. And for some reason, what popped into my head was, I think it's Paul Simon's song about, one man's ceiling's another man's floor. And I thought, one man's sunsets, another man's dawn. And once I got to that, the rest of it just kind of fell out. And it fell out, I would say, in, 7 minutes at my keyboard. And I sent it in, and it never changed, and that was that.
Here, son, I want you to have one of these.
I can't. I'm not a hero like you. Well, not really.
Maybe not. Maybe a real hero's the last one to hear about it. But you pulled me out of a gutter, and for that I owe you some thanks. Just remember, Fievel, one man's sunset is another man's dawn. I don't know what's out there beyond those hills. But if you ride yonder, head up, eyes steady, heart open, I think one day you'll find that you're the hero you've been looking for.
Yeah, that's just, I can't even remember what he said, but I can remember the tone of voice, he had this amazing warmth and, strong but compassionate and just a sort of a sense of wisdom was amazing. Yeah, extraordinary actor. Sadly, Stephen actually went back about 6 months later to pick up a few lines that we weren't quite happy with or wanted to do alternate versions. I talked to Stephen after the session, and he basically said there's nothing we can use from the session. I'm afraid Jimmy didn't even remember doing the previous session. So, sadly, he aged rather abruptly in the sort of intervening 6 months or a year. I can't remember exactly how much it was, and died shortly afterwards.
Universal went all in on Fievel at their theme parks in Hollywood and Orlando, as the New York Times wrote. Fievel's Playland, scheduled to open last week, is half an acre strewn with giant props and sets recreated from Steven Spielberg's films An American Tail and An American Tail Fievel Goes West. Children and parents can ride a 200-foot water ride, crawl through a giant cowboy boot, jump into a campfire skillet, and slide down the horn of a massive 19th century phonograph. At this point, what could be more Disney than Steven Spielberg making his own theme park rides? In spite of the Fievel fanfare, it couldn't take down Disney's juggernaut Beauty and the Beast, which would garner the first Best Picture nomination for an animated film. Fievel would gross $40 million, Beauty and the Beast, when it was all said and done, $331 million. In fact, the films were released on the same day, November 22nd, 1991.
Back then, I did not understand anything about how the movie business worked. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that Fievel Goes West was only the second feature film I'd ever worked on, and I didn't know how any of that was scheduled, and I wasn't in any way involved or even, consulted on it. I look at that now and just think, that was crazy. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just hold off? Because, typically now, if you're in that kind of situation, you would hold off 3 to 4 weeks and just say, okay, Beauty and the Beast is going to have its run, and then people are going to be looking for something else for the kids to go and see. Like, if you're going to go to the cinema with your kids and, Fievel was, it's a sequel to the first American Tale, and it was I don't know whether it was some kind of direct contest thing that was going on, but I can't understand why you'd make a decision like that. As I say, I didn't then, and I don't say that I do now, particularly understand the ins and outs of these are choices that are made considerably above my pay grade.
But it did not seem to anybody in the world that it was game over and Disney was going to win it. At the same time, going head-to-head with the new Disney release is not necessarily the wisest thing to do. But I think it really was a competition. I think Universal felt we can take them on. We've got a sequel to our own successful film because the first American Tale did very well. And we may be able to beat, Disney at their own home and their own turf, and that would be really significant. Because Disney was only becoming the juggernaut that they would become, but they weren't that yet. That made them the juggernaut, really. I'd say Beauty and the Beast is, if you had to pick a most important film of that era, that would be it.
After Disney's renewed success, others were getting into the animation game as well, with releases from Warner Brothers like Rover Dangerfield and Fox's Fern Gully. Spielberg would correctly predict the future when he made this statement about his competitors. In the golden era, every studio had an animation department. There's no limit to it, unless bad stories and bad animation resurface because of economic pressures. And now in 2021, all studios have a requisite animation arm. Amblimation's plan back in the 90s was to follow Fievel Goes West with animated versions of Cats and Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories, which unfortunately didn't make it out of pre-production. There was also one more problem. Spielberg was getting busier with his own live-action films. Steve Hewlett, an animator, was quoted as saying that Amblimation's stories weren't good, and animation is a story art form. He continued by saying that Spielberg turned over the final editing of Jurassic Park to George Lucas because he was busy filming Schindler's List. He's just too busy to give animation the attention that it needs, which is what happened with Amblimation's second feature, We're Back, a dinosaur story, released the same year as Jurassic Park. It only grossed $9 million and had 4 different directors. And you'll remember that Spielberg did not like dark children's films. Well, in this one, the villain Screw Eyes is eaten down to his fake eye by a bunch of crows. This is the story of We're Back. Writer of the 1987 children's book, We're Back, Hudson Talbot.
See, this is a real New York story because it was just a totally lucky break. I was a freelance illustrator in New York, and a children's book editor happened to be in Barnes & Noble. This was back in the days, but when there was only one Barnes & Noble store. And I don't know what he was looking for, but this caught his eye. I'd done a calendar that was a spoof, a parody of a pet owner's manual. That's what I'm trying to say, called Your Pet Dinosaur, Their Care and Feeding. And he just, he loved the idea. This, by the way, was 1984. So we're talking ancient history, primordial, practically. There wasn't this big dinosaur thing. It was a good decade before Jurassic Park or the whole dinosaur craze that, so it was just, like one odd little thing that I did. This guy just happened to see it. He just happened to be in Barnes and Noble. So, if you believe in fate, or the stars being in alignment or something, I don't know, maybe there was an eclipse that day. I don't really know. But that's how it started. What this editor seemed to like about my book was the idea of dinosaurs in modern times. Nobody had done that before. It's hard to believe that there was a time when that idea of, dinosaurs in contemporary times had not been seen, but I certainly had never seen anything before. Like I said, years before Jurassic Park. Anyway, I knew that much, that I wanted to do something with dinosaurs in modern times, and so then I had to think, how can I get them here, and what are they going to do once they get here? I just started piecing it together like that. I needed to come up with a device to get them to modern times. I knew I wanted that in a 32-page picture book. So you have to be really, really concise about everything, and vocabulary and the images and everything really has to all be quick and fast and dirty. And so I tried a couple of different things. I tried, like sort of a Noah's Ark thing where Noah put all the animals in an ark, and there was a Noah's submarine, and he put all the dinosaurs in a submarine. They had such a terrible sense of time that they appeared in New York Harbor, 2,000 years later, 3,000 years later. That was just too long, it was too much material. So I thought, just somehow or other kind of thought like it needs to be kind of instant. And I think that's probably what started me thinking about what would be instant. And I was not alien from the drug world back in those days. Not that I did a lot, but certainly knew about psychedelics. And, this was in my youth, a long time ago. But I thought, well, this would be a quick way to get him there. A time-traveling salesman, he's just testing it out. He's doing test marketing, So it's all the kind of like, contemporary sociological buzzwords, that he just tries it on them and he sees that it works, then he needs to dispose of them. That was, an easy way of like suddenly he dumped them. He just had to dump them someplace. And since he was a time traveler, he just dumped them off in New York City. That was the convenient place, and that's where he had his contact, which was Dr. Miriam Bleeb. And then I remember very clearly having a moment of sort of like one of those flashes of light. It was November, and it was very close to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. And so I was thinking about the parade and what can they do, and how about if they come to town on Thanksgiving Day and they're mistaken for floats in the parade? The big mix-up, the big, catastrophic occurrence happens when some, people suddenly discover that they're real. All hell breaks loose. And see, this is, I guess, I'm not sure I thought this at the time, but I look back on it later and realized this is kind of my story. I've always dreamt of going to New York City. I grew up in Kentucky, and it's hardly unique to me. It's so many people's story. You feel like this big hulking, goofy bumpkin dinosaur, and that's kind of who these guys were. They're just like big, goofy out-of-towners who have no idea which way is uptown or downtown, or they were they were strangers in a really strange land. And that was kind of based on my own experience of coming to New York. I think that book came out within a year. Then Steven Spielberg found it. That sort of put me on the map right away. Now you're really going to think I'm making all this up, but that was another one of those cosmic stories. What I'm told is that Steven Spielberg was in a bookstore with his son, Max. He was a little kid at the time. Obviously, he's an adult now. Max kept making him read it over and over again. And
because, if you're Steven Spielberg and your 6-year-old son really loves a book, you don't just buy a copy of the book, you actually buy the book and make a movie out of it.
Then the Spielberg people called me and I said, well, thanks. I'm glad Steven's interested in it, but, I've already sold the option to Hanna-Barbera. So they got on the line to Hanna-Barbera. They tried to work out a co-production with Hanna-Barbera, but ultimately it was to their best interest to just buy out Hanna-Barbera's rights on it. And so from that point forward, I just dealt with Amblin. That's how it got started.
It's a kind of somewhat troubled history that Phil and I were developing We're Back during the making of Fievel Goes West. I mean, to be honest, I did wonder whether I ought to have my name on We're Back at all, partly because I didn't know how much I really felt like my contributions to the film had ended up in the final film. So, and if I'm being brutal about it, it might be better for my career if I hadn't had my name on it. I don't know. I can't say I'm particularly proud of how that movie ended up. It was a complicated and troubled film for a number of reasons. The film had originally been written by Flint Dilley and I can't remember, Sherry Stoner, that's it, yes, thank you.
I remember when we got done with the last recording session at Fievel. It was kind of a funny day. Steven said, "Oh yeah, I got another movie for you." I mean, it's like last day. Oh great. I'm driving away in my car overheats. I literally drive it over to the Nissan. It was a Mustang. I drive it over to the Nissan dealership. Kind of look around at the cars long enough to my car stop smoking, and bought myself a new Z because I figured, oh good, I still have a career after this. That was my sentence walking away from the film. That's not really a big piece of animation history. It was kind of amusing, which was kind of interesting. But anyway, after that came Sherry Stoner and I did several versions of a movie. I don't know if anybody ever cracked it, called We're Back. That was one of these things where I think it was Max's favorite book for a time. Okay, and what you can't under factor now that I'm actually a parent is how much, when you're a parent and you have a kid a certain age, you want to do stuff that impresses them. I mean, it always thrilled me much later on when I had kids and my son would be playing video games I designed or written or worked on. You know what I mean? That's how it works. And, and you remember Max is about 6 at this point. And I remember getting notes from Max on We're Back. Yeah, went over to Steven's house, and they're on the couch with Max. And, Steven was telling him about scenes, and he was reacting to them more than like he was reading a script, giving me notes. But, I thought it was kind of funny. It's like, God, I'm getting notes from a 6-year-old, and it's like they're better notes than I'm getting from most studio executives. This is good.
Then Spielberg talked to John Patrick Shanley, brother, who'd just come off, just won an Oscar for Moonstruck, that's it. Steven did a deal with Shanley to write this thing. He wrote the script in 10 days.
Kathy Kennedy had been talking to John Patrick Shanley, and they had a conversation, and he had some ideas. Everything he did was thrown out. I remember seeing one note from, we were kept in the correspondence. We were kind of on it as writers of record for a while. It's just we started being asked less and less and less. And, we sort of I remember talking to Sherry one day and saying, I think we're off that project. We were both doing something else for Amblin at that point anyway. And neither of us really mourned the loss of We're Back. That was just, we literally took the book literally from page by page and then tried to fill, because, if you really did that book, you have a 3-minute movie. So we had to figure out how to figure out what the other 87 minutes were. I had no auteur vision of what I was doing there. John Patrick Shanley had an auteur vision and did the much more typical Hollywood thing. He just at a certain point just threw the book out and just did his own, what he wanted to do with it. Just somehow, they called it We're Back, and there was a dinosaur in there or something. I to be honest with you, I don't think I ever saw the movie.
And then we couldn't change a word of it without his direct permission, which, is not a particularly good way of arranging things creatively. Yeah, it was. I don't really want to go telling tales on the various mistakes that were made in terms of sort of fundamental choices of the movie, but I think the original charming and rather simple children's books were taken off on a ride that didn't really necessarily relate to the concept of the books that much. And so, yeah, I can't say I'm a big fan of how the movie ended up.
Well, Jurassic Park, you see, finished. And the year that we released We're Back was the year of the dinosaur. Jurassic Park had come out ahead of us by a few months. And so we thought the timing was amazingly good. As Steven said, We're Back is my dinosaur film for the rest of us. So he knew he was making a scary film with Jurassic Park, and he wanted to make a children's version of the dinosaur movie, just for counter programming. It's a dark film. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, frankly, but it is what it is. Well, we saw it on the first day of the script, right? And we were part of the script, actually. There was a lot of back and forth. Again, I come from a very silly and funny and comedy sensibility, and so I was always pushing for the silly stuff. And Simon and Steven were loving the more horrific stuff, and God bless them. We'll try it that way. I'm not gonna pull out my machine gun and start shooting. If Steven wants it that way, well then great, let's go that way. But as you know from looking at Steven Spielberg's films, his taste goes in two directions. He either likes, Raiders of the Lost Ark is fun and family friendly, but the second one, the Temple of Doom, is much darker and more almost horrific in places. So Steven has those two tastes that he likes, and so Fievel Goes West was more fun and family friendly, and We're Back went in the more dark direction that Steven liked. Oh, that was an interesting experience. When we were posting We're Back, we moved to the production to LA, and they set us up in an editing bay right next to Steven's unit, and series of rooms was right next to ours. And they were doing Schindler's List while we're doing this Happy Dinosaur film, right? And we would pass the door and we would see all these horrible black and white images of Nazis and poor Jews in concentration camps. And then they would look through our room, and there was these happy images of dancing dinosaurs. And they would stop with this look of death on their face, because they've been looking at all these horrible images in black and white for years, and they were so tired and gaunt, and they would stop and stare at these happy dinosaurs dancing and frolicking, and it's like obviously it was all too much. This was just too much for them, and they needed the therapy of looking at happy cartoon dinosaurs.
We're Back mixes light and dark elements to the extreme. The film even opens on a golf course, with John Goodman's T-Rex character playing the back nine, but stopping to tell Baby Bird his story. Later, a set of crows devour the film's villain. The film features the voice talents of Julia Childs, Walter Cronkite, and Jay Leno. This film has the full spectrum of everything, and yet still manages not to be for everyone. The clashing styles almost make it an avant-garde film. And as far as one of the scariest villains you'll see in a children's film, Screw Eyes, the demented circus owner, that role was originally for John Malkovich, who was replaced after he did too dark of a take on the character.
That went through some changes. I mean, we had John Malkovich, do it at first. John Malkovich was in London at the time, performing on stage in the West End, and we got him in to record Screw Eyes, and he delivered a performance that was absolutely hair-raisingly scary. It was so diabolically evil. We actually lived with that performance for quite some time, and so finally, focus groups, and people were saying, "Geez, this is just this is almost R-rated. It gets so, psychologically disturbing. I suggested, and I think we finally got him, was Christopher Lloyd. We all flew in. He was in Boston, and so producers flew in from L.A., and we flew in from London to record Christopher Lloyd. And he didn't show up, and we called his hotel, and because he was performing on stage in Boston. We called the theater, and we called his manager. We sat there literally a whole day. Finally, we were talking to the production manager who was in the theater, and the guy says, wait, he just walked in to the theater. So he got on the line with me, and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I've got laryngitis. I really blew it. I can't do it. So we all went home to L.A. and London and stuff, and came back the next week and recorded him. I thought Christopher Lloyd delivered a great performance, and we cut it all in. It was too funny. It was too, great Scott, that kind of funny. And I'm sorry to see him go, but I suggested Kenneth Mars. He was the guy who in Young Frankenstein, he was the Nazi producers. He was in Young Frankenstein as the commander who had the wooden arm. Remember that? And what Steven wanted was something halfway in between John Malkovich and Christopher Lloyd. So a little bit more scary than Christopher Lloyd, but not as scary as being John Malkovich. I keep saying being John Malkovich. So anyways, good old Kenny Mars, he nailed it. He hit that nice sweet spot between scary and comedy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the most terrifying show on the planet Earth. Professor Screw-Eye's Eccentric Circus! We will scare you. We will frighten you. We will shock you witless with our dreadful, terrifying, vile, monstrous program. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you the Infernal Grand Demon Parade!
So yeah, it took a long time though. The production took quite a while. It was actually being done over in London, and they did fly me to London. That was a big experience. Everybody was very nice to me, but it was one of those things where you just saw your child being eviscerated essentially, and Phil kind of told me that they had a welcome party for me, but it was a very kind of strange affair because they knew they were young and creative people themselves, so they knew how I would likely react to what they had already been doing. And, nothing was the same. I arrived and we went to the party and they were kind of saying, okay, we'll see you at the studio tomorrow morning. And it was kind of like that, and they were being nice, but they kind of knew what was coming. And sure enough, I saw the first thing that I saw were the character designs, and they were the generic, big white round eyes with black dots that, Disney had done for the last, 40 or 50 years or more. And it's like, it's just, the whole point of my book was that it was something different, that's what was selling it. It was something that had not been done before, but I had no creative control, and it was my very first book and absolutely my first movie. I've sold rights since then, but nothing else has actually been produced of my work. So that was it for me. And so I really had no authority, no control, no clout in the situation. But here's the funny thing. About midway through that week, they have their weekly conference call with Steven. So, you know, I didn't know what I was going to say to him, because by then I was already in the middle of my nervous breakdown about what was going on. Anyway, the conference call with Steven came up, and, you know, about 8 or 10 people sitting around the table with the speaker in the middle of the table, and sort of like the voice of God emanating out of it, Steven talking to them. And I don't know if it was Phil or Simon, somebody said, and Steven, today we've got Hudson Talbot here with us. And Steven goes, Hudson Talbot? You mean the Hudson Talbot? And I said, yes, it's the Hudson Talbot talking to the Steven Spielberg. And we went on talking a bit, or I was listening and he was talking. And one of the things that he said that I'll never forget was, Hudson, I keep telling these guys, it's all about the book. The book, the book, the book. I just keep telling them to go back to the book and they'll be fine. And I'm sitting there going like, what the fuck are you talking about? I just saw what they're doing, you know. I know what's going on here. It was like one of those moments like, oh my God, is this reality? I'm glad that check is actually in my bank account. You know, what else can I say? I just kind of went along with it and said, well, it is what it is, you know, kind of like that. There really wasn't much I could say because the train had long since left that station, you know.
Oh God, I feel bad about that. Oh, I imagine it is, you know, it's that complete Hollywood experience of my baby got taken away and, you know, dressed up in the most appalling drag and turned into a monster. Yeah. Oh, well, sorry about that.
What happened was that we were doing We're Back, and we were doing the animatic for We're Back. And then Steven secured the rights with Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats. And so he wanted Simon and I to jump onto Cats. And so we got in Dick Zondag and Ralph Zondag, two brothers who had been animating for Don Bluth in Ireland. We got them in to take on We're Back.
Director Dick Zondag.
Yeah, I was still at Bluth at that point, and both my brother and I, Ralph, were getting restless. I think we saw that, oh shit, you know, that with Steven Spielberg out of the question, the grade of movies we're making were suddenly becoming a little bit more in question. And so you know, we got frustrated by that, and we then were offered a situation to come in to direct We're Back, A Dinosaur Story at Amblimation in London. You know, that had its own series of complications, but you know, because at the time, Simon Wells and Phil Newlink were slotted to do that. But the reason they were bringing us in is because there was a third movie coming up, which was going to be Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats. So what happened was, okay, they were going to bring us in to do a dinosaur story, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, and then Simon and Phil would leapfrog onto Cats. And that's kind of how that worked out.
Director Ralph Zondag.
So we saw this opportunity as a great one. My God, it worked with Steven Spielberg and and you know, our first film. So we did it. When we came on, it was weird because we were almost like more like shepherds to a picture that was already pretty much storyboarded. It was Phil and Simon, they worked real hard before they moved on to Cats to try to board out the whole movie as possible as they can. I mean, Dick and I, we came on and there was maybe about 3-4 sequences left to do, and then lots of notes from Steven Spielberg. So, you know, we really didn't have that kind of input in the story that we would have liked. It was more an opportunity for us to kind of work for Amblimation and work for Steven. Like some of the stuff that Dick and I storyboarded, Dick storyboarded, you know, and Steven was really excited with it. That whole moment where you see all the children, the bubbles coming out of that little moment, that was, we did that. We tried to add as much heart to it as we could with what little time and effort we had, because that was one of the things that we felt was missing from that, was just a sense of, a warmth to the picture. And we tried to do best what we can, and that was one of the sequences that we really took over and tried to play that out. I kind of set up a little bit of moment with Louis and Cecilia as well, to kind of bring the warmth of their relationship when you first introduce Cecilia and all that. But when it comes to the action set pieces and the circus, that was already completed. Yeah, it was like that. That was one of the complaints, because they had the whole circus. It's funny. I just watched the movie again last night. I was just have to refamiliarize myself as well. It's been so long, and then I realized, oh my God, I didn't realize how dark it actually is in an area. Just some of the look and the feel, and that whole circus area, and that was all storyboarded. It was all set up in such a way. It was even art directed at that point to look the way it did. We just had to kind of follow through and just sort of see it through. But it was kind of set right from the get-go, the look of that picture. That was one of the complaints. Families, kids would go see that, and they would get spooked by that moment. So it was just one of those choices that you kind of go, oh well, is what it is. You went down that road and carved it in stone. So
Director Dick Zondag.
It was like the artists were amazing, and Steven Spielberg was absolutely amazing. In general, the crew was amazing. But I think, it had its learning curves, and it had some bumps and grinds. And one of the biggest issues my brother and I had was that as good of a writer as John Patrick Shanley is, he had a legal contract that wouldn't allow us to change anything in the story. And that, in animation, that's tough to do, because you need to be able to sculpt as you're going along. And even Steven had a hard time, saying to get changes. So if we wanted changes, we had to ask Steven, and he would have, and if he agreed, he then would have to ask John Patrick Shanley. And sometimes John Patrick Shanley would just say no.
Director Ralph Zondag.
Yeah, it was written in the contract. If we had notes on the script, we'd have to run them by him, and he would sort of say yay or nay to it. And if we really felt strongly about something, and we would have to get Steven Spielberg to do the talking. It was just, I think with John Patrick Shanley, he wasn't long after I think he wrote Moonstruck. And, that was a really successful film for him and all that. So I don't know whether, you're riding high and you kind of feel like, every word is gold and all that sort of thing. But I think we had maybe one call with him. We wanted to change a line or something like that. We didn't want to have it changed and all that sort of thing. It was just, okay. So it was just it was a little unusual, because in an animated film, a lot of the film direction, a lot of the making of the picture comes in the storyboards. And, and yes, you have a script that you follow and do, but you do sort of embellish. You strengthen certain lines. You might add a line here. You might take a word out there, all that sort of thing to help build it. And that's what's so great about the storyboarding process on an animated film, is you can kind of see it before you commit to the full production of the sequence. So it allows you a bit of time to kind of see how things are working. And so you're seeing stuff not working, and you're trying to get them to alter it, and you find out you can't. You're kind of, you're somewhat painted into a corner that way.
He had a lot of control as a writer. It was definitely was the dark, and it's just the way John Patrick Shanley writes. It's this kind of an offbeat, and I love him. I think he's an amazing writer. But I think that he didn't understand how animation worked, and it's different than live action, and he's one of those guys that doesn't really have to work, and he owned his own theaters and whatnot in New York, and he had a pretty good life. And so it was one of those deals. He had a very strong and ironclad contract, I think. So from that point of view, we weren't able to change stuff. And I know it was a frustration for Stephen too. But if we had story issues that we wanted to talk about, Stephen had to go throh Shanley. And I know this was a frustration for Stephen. This is not, I don't think this is a deal that he personally had put together. It may have been a deal that his studio had put together without him really knowing that that's how it was going to go. I don't know all the facets to the whole thing, but, except that he had this ironclad contract. And he made them stick to it, including Stephen. So, that was, I would say, was my biggest frustration there, was we just couldn't change anything. I think though, if you were to kind of go and look at it from maybe John Patrick Shanley's point of view, he's made a franchise out of writing a particular way. And if you change from that particular way, then it's not John Patrick Shanley writing any longer. Does that make any sense? He had best interest to make this a good movie too, but but in We're Back, it was John Patrick Shanley or go home.
Director Ralph Zondag.
It felt a little bit, that's why I look back. I was so young at the time. How old was I? I was like 26 when I first jumped onto that project. I was, the first big opportunity and all that sort of stuff. And you were really kind of tied into a look, into a story. I mean, the boarding was, like I said, was pretty much done. And we didn't really get to put our fingerprints on that movie. I just knew that what the certain things that we wanted to do, we were just, we didn't have the time to do that, to kind of dissect it and reopen certain things. And now I just, even looking at the book, the Hudson Talbot book of We're Back, the actual, where the story was derived from, it's just not like that. The book is actually kind of a playful, fun children's book. So I'm not really sure why the look went in that direction, to be honest with you. A lot of the art direction of that picture was already sort of, because what happens, on a picture, you're multitasking and you've got the look of the picture is being sort of developed simultaneously. And a lot of those backgrounds are painted. And so, there's a lot of time and effort into just painting those backgrounds. And a lot of that stuff was already being, had been approved and was painted, indicated as the look that they wanted prior to us jumping onto that picture. So we were kind of handcuffed, I guess you can say, to certain decisions that were made prior to us being on the picture. So we really didn't have that much input to say, can we change this completely out, change the coloring of this out entirely? So I would have. I would have had a little more fun with it. Just looking at it last night, I was like, my God, if he took another stab at it, take that and took another stab at it, particularly with today's technology, you wonder what that picture could have looked like. Digital characters, whatever, digital backgrounds, and made it a bit more playful, fun, a little more lively, bright colors, and spend a bit more time with the personality, the character of the character, of the personalities, and develop that a little bit more. It would be interesting. I think you could actually have kind of a fun little movie. But I look back at the movie and I think there's things about it that's kind of nice. There's some nice animation in here, and then there's some animation that go, ooh, ouch, and but I think it could have been a whole lot more.
And then after a considerable period of time, about a year, then Spielberg and those guys decided they didn't like where it was going and wanted us to come back. Also, Cats fell apart, but they also wanted Phil and I to come back and sort out as much as we could We're Back, which was also concurrent with kind of the early development of Balto. And eventually it became sensible for me to go on to developing Balto and Phil to carry the end of We're Back.
Director Ralph Zondag.
It was it was close to finishing. It was close to finishing. Our contracts came up, and what happened was that Cats was being shelved, and Simon and Phil, would have been without work. So our contracts came up, and they came back in. And considering that they boarded the whole movie, pretty much, it was kind of their picture in the first place. So that's sort of how it went. Yeah. But it was, like I'm saying, it was a great opportunity. It was a great calling card. It was a great opportunity for us to kind of get, work with Steven Spielberg, have him as a mentor as well, which was, pretty cool. So
Fievel Goes West was more fun and family friendly, and went in the more dark direction that Stephen liked. And then that became a problem when it focus grouped, and audiences who were expecting a family fun for the whole family type of story were alarmed that their children might be alarmed or upset by the imagery. Now, we found over and over again that children love that stuff, oh, it's cool, all that horror and blood and guts, right? It's the adults who are worried about scaring the children. The children eat it up. The adults are trying to protect their children, protect their innocence, and understandably so. I get it. I got 4 children, but the point is they want a PG film to be PG, and that's not what they were getting in these focus groups on We're Back. And we had actually tried it without. We had tried a couple different endings and a couple different beginnings, as I think about it. And they focus grouped poorly as well. So it was a kind of a torturous film because we were flailing around going in so many different directions.
And because of the dark themes, Spielberg wanted the movie cut down to 71 minutes.
Since you haven't got outtakes and you haven't got extra footage to work with, the only way to modify or change the film in the last few months of production is to shorten it. The only wiggle room you have. And so as Stephen would not like a given chunk, you couldn't replace it with anything because we were out of time and money. So the only way you could go was to go shorter, which isn't always the best way to go, obviously.
It is a thing which I have to be honest, I have rather blanked out of my memory. Oh, I have actually watched the whole movie once, the final version, because I did go to the crew screening. I remember my band in London played at the wrap party at the Natural History Museum, but I remember that more clearly than the actual film itself. So yeah, I mean, I was not involved in any of the sort of final stages of films. I was already doing Balto by then. So yeah, I can't say that I even what the movie ended up looking like or any of that.
Because I even remember being in the studio of Deluxe and going to the shipping dock in the back where they were piling up cans of Mrs. Doubtfire. And we were shipping it across the country. And I thought to myself, God, if I just set fire or steal or drive up in a truck and load up Mrs. Doubtfire and drive off with Mrs. Doubtfire, I'll be able to moo-ha-ha, and the weekend will be mine, moo-ha-ha. And Stephen, I even apologized to him at one point, saying, I'm sorry. It didn't make much money. It was a flop. And he said, it's okay. We're owed a hit now. And I thought that was very nice of him to have that sort of, you can't always make hits attitude and come on, let's keep working. I appreciated that in him.
Unfortunately, this was my book that was, being totally redone with, but it still had my name on it and my title and the rest of it. I had to be philosophical about it because I'd already deposited the check, what can I say? And the check cleared, and so that they're going to do whatever they're going to do. Of course, I didn't have any creative control over it, but we talked about it a lot. They were really good guys. I don't want to sound like I'm coming down on them. They were just really clear, like they just were producing what they thought Steven would want. He bought something else than what you all are doing. He bought this book that's all about double entendres and irony and tongue-in-cheek humor, and where's any of that? But that wasn't what they were doing. That was just, they were doing what they thought was what he wanted and what would sell to the middle American market, I guess. And that's purely my conjecture. I don't, I can't really say what they were, but that's certainly what it looked like to me at the time. Once it was done, it was over, and months later, I went back to LA, and they did invite me to the opening, which was not that big of a deal. I mean, it was. They invited people there. And they also gave me an opening too, in New York, so that I could invite my friends. Of course, I invited everybody I knew in New York, which was a lot of people. They had it in the theater for me, and I saw it for the first time just about 3 days before the screening, and I gasped. I just like, oh my God, how can I get out of this? So comes the screening with all of my friends, everybody I knew in the art world, and, the literary, with all of my people in New York had come to this to support me. And I said, well, thank you all for coming. I stood up front. And I just want to say one thing to remember. I did the book, they did the movie. So just bear that in mind as you watch this, and have a lovely time tonight, and come back to my loft after. We're going to have a party. So it was basically my disclaimer on that film. And people came out and said to me right away, it's a really good thing that you said that at the beginning of the movie, just to be sure everybody knew who did what on this thing. That was 1993, and we've laughed about it ever since. In fact, I hope you don't mind me rambling a little bit. Well, this is a good side note for this, because the storyline was that Rex, my main character, sees a big dinosaur-shaped balloon, one of those big, and he thinks it's his old buddy Wargo, and he goes over to shake hands with him and say hello, and he trips and he falls, and the thing explodes, and then suddenly everybody realizes that they're real dinosaurs. So fast forward many years, and the movie has just come out, and a photographer wanted me to go up to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade because they had bought and paid for a giant balloon version of Rex, my character. And so this photographer wanted to take a picture of me, sort of like, just holding one of the ropes to the balloon Rex. And suddenly the parade started to move. The photographer disappeared. I was trying to, get back into the crowd, but they were saying, no, go forward. You have to go with it now. There I was walking along with this balloon version of Rex. I mean, it was a giant thing. It was like, I don't know, whatever, 30 or 40 feet long. So we got to Columbus Circle, and they said, okay, this is where the wind picks up, everybody. So, we're going to have to run across here so that the wind doesn't take it away from us. So everybody, shot across, running and carrying this balloon all at the same time. And just as we sort of exhaled, a wind blew up and threw the thing right into a lamppost, and it exploded just like it did in the book. Kind of horrifying. Not that I felt physically threatened at all, but it's sort of like this enormous thing hovering overhead suddenly gets smaller and smaller, and starts to deflate nobody quite knew what to do. I think it was, there was a sense of panic among all the other people. There must have been, I don't know, I'm going to say 20 other handlers, that all had a rope in their hand. Nobody knew exactly what we were supposed to do. The head, which is what caught the lamppost, really did explode. It was just hanging there as if it had just, been beaten to death or something, or, hit by a truck or something. I was tapping on people's shoulders saying, you have to know this balloon that we're holding, it was based on a character that this very thing happened to. And nobody cared. Nobody wanted to listen to me. They had no idea who I was or my book. There was very few people that I could share that story with that knew the book. See, the movie was just premiering. It was like the week that it was premiering. And, we to this day, we laugh about that story. Life imitating art.
After we're back, Amblimation would only make one more film, which is often regarded as its best. They turned to director Simon Wells for the story of Balto.
From a world of incredible spectacle, at the edge of the Alaskan frontier, comes the unforgettable legend of Balto.
But you can call him Idiot.
Again, the development partner had found it and they'd sent it to us, and Phil and I had read it and said, yeah, this is genuinely an animated feature and we should do it. And Spielberg had said, I don't know, I don't get it. It's going to be just a bunch of dogs running around in the snow. I can't see why that's going to be, visually arresting. The story's okay, but like, how are you going to make that look interesting? And so we sort of literally had to jump through the hoops and say, this is why it's not going to look boring. It's not just going to be a snowscape. Yeah, we lobbied to make that film. And actually, in order to prove to Spielberg that the film was not just going to be, a bunch of dogs running around in a white background, we had Hans Barker, who was the production designer on the film, did a series of paintings, dozens of paintings. He'd paint these little sort of 5x3 cards that were actually mostly based on my storyboards, and showed what the thing could look like, how beautiful the lighting could be, how evocative and atmospheric it could look. And that really managed to persuade Spielberg, okay, this film is going to look like something. It's not just a sweet story. It's actually going to have a real art look to it. For research, Phil and I went dog sledding. We went up into the Arctic Circle to Rovaniemi up in Finland, and spent several days dog sledding in unbelievable cold. It was, and we showed up, and we brought all our skiing gear and thermal underwear, and the guys running the dog sledding outfit just looked at us and laughed, and handed us, these full-body jumpsuits that were lined with reindeer fur, but you went out there, and sometimes we go and stand and wait for the musher to bring the sled past so we could get some drive-by shots and things like that. And for one thing, you stand there, and after about 5 minutes, you realize, I can feel my life just kind of sucking away from me. The cold is just taking all the energy out of my body. And then the other thing that happened is all of our video and camera equipment just stopped working. It just froze. So yeah, very, very, very cold. But it was amazing to go and do that. And in particular, it was amazing because you really get a sense of the energy of the dogs. It was hilarious. So, first day they get the sled out, and all the dogs in the kennel are just leaping at the wire and barking away. And normally sled dogs are very quiet. They'll howl in the evening, but they don't normally bark. But my God, when they see the sled, they go just completely apeshit. And so I think his name's Reiki would go in and pull out the dogs one at a time. You had to be careful because all the dogs wanted to come out because they all wanted to be on the sled. And you hook up the front dog, and you have to have nailed the sled down with like this foot-long iron post that you've hammered into the ice, because that dog throws itself against the traces so hard that the whole sled is lifting off the ground. It can't wait to get running. And, you finally get all the dogs, hooked up to the sled. The sheer acceleration when you pull the post out of the ground and these dogs take off, it is astounding. And then they just run forever. They just don't stop. They keep going and going and going. Sled dogs are amazing, amazing animals. Don't have one as a pet because they don't walk at heel. And had a friend who had a half husky in London, and his he left his front door open one time, and the dog went straight out under a car. They just have no idea about, once they get to running, they just keep running. We did actually bring one of the dogs indoors and sat around and sketched it. But we also, we found an outfit in England who had a sled dog team, I don't know, in Norfolk or somewhere. And they had a tricycle trolley that they would hook the dogs up to train. And we brought them down to Acton and did a whole sketching session with the animators. But yeah, it's funny that I remember up in Rovaniemi when we brought one of the dogs indoors. She was desperately embarrassed. She knew she didn't belong indoors, and she didn't like being looked at by everybody. So she sat sort of awkwardly, looking at us out of the corner of her eye, because she knew she shouldn't be there. Very sweet, lovely dogs. Never actually gone to see the corpse of Balto, the stuffed Balto. Yeah, it's in a museum in Cleveland, isn't it? They keep it in a refrigerated, storage room and bring it out every day. No, I've seen photographs. We did go and shoot at the statue to Balto in Central Park. That's the real thing. We shot the live action bumpers on location. We had sort of been under a budget constraint on the previous films, but we just hadn't known it. I was just more conscious of it on Balto. It meant you had to plan stuff out. So I spent several days early on with our head of visual effects going through every single shot and saying, okay, we definitely need shadows here because that's the nature of the story point we're making. When Balto is going up to the window of the hospital, we've got to have long shadows being cast. But, okay, when we're out in the snow, arguably we only need to see footprints in the snow when we're really close in and looking at footprints in the snow, so we can cut them out here. And so there was a lot of just going through with a fine-tooth comb and figuring out exactly what we needed in the shot. You've got a dog sled team, but how many shots do you need to have all of the dogs in shot? You're always thinking in terms of the number of characters in the shot and that kind of thing. One of the things I have kept and I'm very proud of is a letter that Stephen wrote to me after Balto came out that went on effusively about how every shot is a painting. It's a really beautiful piece of art.
Although Balto only made $11 million at the box office, it became a home video gem and garnered a wide following, but was lost in the glow of The Lion King and Toy Story. Amblimation, the company, had produced 3 films, which had only generated $60 million at the box office. And then all of a sudden, it was over. On October 12, 1994, Spielberg moved on to DreamWorks with Disney alum Jeffrey Katzenberg, where he helped finally establish Disney's greatest rival in animation with hit movies like Shrek and Kung Fu Panda.
Dick Zondag and I were working on the animatic for Cats, and we actually had a fairly big crew. There was a script that Andrew was excited about. And so it was during that production of Cats that, I guess you'd call that the fourth life of Cats, came back to life again. And we had a very large crew in LA. And at that point, Frank Wells, who was the chief financial officer of Disney, tragically died in a helicopter skiing accident. And Jeffrey wanted Frank Wells's job, and Eisner didn't want him to do it. And they got into a fight, and it was a parting of the ways. And so Jeffrey was out then of Disney. And at the same time, Kathy Kennedy and Frank Marshall had moved away from Steven to do their projects. Jeffrey jumped into Steven's arms and said, "Come on, let's make movies together. Let's make animation." And so they started DreamWorks. Jeffrey took a look at Cats and he said, "I don't like it. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it." And so he cut that project free from the DreamWorks roster. But Tom Pollock, who was the head of Universal Productions, loved Cats and thought it was a good project. And so he took the project on and he shepherded it. And so I moved from being with DreamWorks and Steven, and I moved under Tom Pollock's wing, continued to develop Cats with him. And then there was a big takeover. I think it was that Canadian alcohol company. I've forgotten the name now. And so every time there's a takeover, what happens is they bring in new people, and they got rid of all the old projects, because God forbid they should, follow through on older projects because they want to bring in their own projects. So we were on the chopping block along with a lot of other projects in the pipeline. And so Cats got canned because of the Egrams takeover.
Amblimation wasn't so much dead as it was transformed into DreamWorks Animation, as many of the Amblimation artists were hired to work for DreamWorks, including director Simon Wells, who helped helm Prince of Egypt, one of DreamWorks' first releases.
We didn't know anything about it. He kept the whole thing very close to his chest until, it started leaking out in the press in late '94. So, yeah, it was kind of a total surprise. But actually, I've got to say, from my point of view, it was great because, Steven wanted to bring a whole lot of us across to help start up the animation department. And it was a chance for me to move out to LA because, I had interest in getting into other parts of the movie business, and doing the move out to LA would be a very, difficult thing to achieve, both financially and in terms of, getting a visa and that kind of stuff. And so this was my ticket out to LA, which was, very fortuitous. I mean, the good thing we had going for us setting up DreamWorks Animation was that we had most of the crew from London. We brought over 120 animators from London who had been working together for the previous 5 years. So although we were a brand new studio, we could hit the ground running and do something like Prince of Egypt because, half the crew had been working together for a very long time. And that really, I think, made a difference to just sort of the efficiency of the film.
The film that we're seeing produced out of this facility is the best animation that I've ever been involved with, and all this work will create for us my dream, which is to have for the rest of all of our careers a thriving animation studio somewhere in the world.
Although Spielberg set out to be Walt Disney with Amblimation, he didn't reach his goal. In fact, he didn't even get close. However, like Disney, his fingerprints and influence are all over decades of movies, theme parks, and television. In the end, it's easy to imagine Walt Disney and Steven Spielberg sitting on a Western landscape, just like Wiley Burp and Fievel Goes, passing the artistic torch and looking towards the future.
Here, son, I want you to have one of these.
I can't. I'm not a hero like you. Well, not really.
Maybe not. Maybe a real hero's the last one to hear about it. But you pulled me out of a gutter, and for that I owe you some thanks. Just remember, Fievel, One man's sunset is another man's dawn. I don't know what's out there beyond those hills. But if you ride yonder, head up, eyes steady, heart open, I think one day you'll find that you're the hero you've been looking for.
We just finished a movie called The First Superhero, and in small caption subtitled Monkey King. And that's based on a 500-year-old story from China. It's a really, really cool story. But we're sort of telling the origins of the Monkey King, and we've sort of updated it in such a way that it plays more like a Marvel, Kung Fu Panda Marvel superhero quality to it. So, yeah, it's a really great movie. It's really, really fun. We're excited. It's going to be coming out, we believe, sometime next month in China. We don't have exactly the day in which it's coming out. The Chinese, they do things right to the last minute. You don't know in advance exactly when it's going to come out, but it's going to have a big China release, and following that, it'll have a North American one.